This episode is brought to you by Communications Training for Coffee Teams, a new Map It Forward workshop tailored to get your team communicating more confidently to improve general mental health as well as business profitability. Click the link in the show notes for further details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and today, episode 4 of our 5-part series with Judy Ganes, we are talking about Robusta. Since World of Coffee, I have been excited about having this conversation with you, because it was at World of Coffee that I really started hearing so many producers talking about not whether Robusta was the future, but that Robusta is the future of the industry. What are your thoughts around that concept that Robusta is going to be the future, it is the future of our industry, Judy?
Okay, so let's go back in time.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1997, Arabica prices had surged and Robusta prices were very depressed because suddenly, through a change in the governmental policy, land ownership in Vietnam, and with some advisement through the World Bank, Vietnam, who was for a century producer of 1 million bags of coffee, suddenly started to increase their production. And they had record production of 15 million bags. And so that was
Of Robusta.
huge, of Robusta. And that was huge. And so it sank the market. And when Arabica prices surged, roasters took notice of that disparity, of that wide arbitrage between the two markets, and they learned to utilize more Robusta in a blend. And it used to be a fixed amount. And then all of a sudden, well, they learned to steam clean the Robusta. And Vietnam, over time, has also not only worked on quantity, but quality and hand-in-hand relationships and technology of equipment. And roasting has also made Robusta more user-friendly to American consumers in particular.
You mean from a palate perspective or from a caffeine?
Palate perspective, well, that they don't notice how much is in a can of coffee, where it could be, a substantial amount of Robusta and then enough Arabica to give it, the flavor profile that they want. And so I think over time, there's been some adjustments and highly customizable blends and the sophistication and technology, technology in the roasting process has helped to push that along. So it's hand in hand. Brazil has seen Robusta production surge. Why? Because it's a hardier plant, less susceptible to disease and problems, and you get tremendous yields. And therefore, you don't have the same cyclical pattern in terms of the trees. And some of that has to do with the pruning techniques. So a little quick lesson on that. In Brazil, you have small producers, so 10 hectares, who one season will have higher yields, and then they go to zero safra, where they completely prune their trees and they have no production the next year. And then they balance it that way. But what happens if you have a frost or a drought and you lose your on-year production, you have no production the next year? So you're always averaging 2 yields and trying to manage your costs around that. With Robusta, you don't have that, because the difference is that you chop off the branches where the cherries are, and the new branches are always growing up on top, so you're never without a crop from one year to the next.
Right.
And so you have better yield overall. And so that is tremendous. So for those that are capable of expanding and new frontier in areas where it works, Robusta growth is at a much faster pace than Arabica.
And it seems like, given what's going on with the economy globally, given what's going on with the volatility of pricing, given what's going on with climate change and coffee leaf rust and, all the other challenges that producers are facing, we were talking in previous episodes of the next generation that is coming. It sounds like this is an easy decision to transition to Robusta, given the press that's been given to Robusta and the positive press that's been given to Robusta, but also given the necessity of having to go there. I moderated a panel with Ghanaian coffee producers at World of Coffee, and Ghana is investing hugely into the production of Robusta and the future of their economy being hedged on being able to export Ghanaian Robusta moving forward.
So remember, West Africa produces Robusta and East Central Africa produces Arabica. And you have different areas, it's not an either or. So if you're a Honduran on a steep slope at over a certain altitude, you don't have that choice of what you're going to grow. So you talk about next generation, okay, the son of a Honduran coffee farmers and saying, well, I'm going to go be a coffee farmer in Indonesia or Vietnam and grow Robusta. Or I'm migrating to Brazil to grow Robusta coffee and be a farmer there. I mean, that doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. All right. So what we're going to see.
Right.
So the way I understood it at World of Coffee when people were having conversations with me is it's not going to be a choice of producers whether they can continue to produce Arabica. There are going to be external forces that are going to push them out of being able to produce Arabica. Have I understood that correctly?
Well, if the demand is shifting and Robusta prices are more competitive and roasting techniques lend itself to an increased utilization of Robusta, then sure, there's a lot of baseline Arabica coffee that isn't going to be competitive. But
also from a climate perspective, it's just going to become increasingly more difficult, right? Like they're literally physically not going to be able to grow the crops. So I want to take everything that we've talked about and ask a very strange question that I've asked of somebody who is a commodities broker, and they didn't have an answer. And I'm like, Judy's the only person that's going to be able to answer this.
Right. The pressure's on.
Well, you're the sea market queen. So, and everybody in the industry knows that. So you're the person to answer this. So we've established that Arabica is going to face a very challenging future. And Arabica is traded on a futures market mostly, as well as a cash market, right? And so this is my question. What market will Robusta be traded on if the C market starts to dwindle?
Oh, well, there's the London Robusta contract that is also under it's under ICE Europe. Okay. So the history on that was, let me think back, it was the London Coffee Exchange, then it became Life, and then it became Euronext, and then ICE. So that was when there was the Coffee Sugar Cocoa Exchange, and then the New York Board of Trade, and then it became ICE, and they own both. So there's the two contracts already simultaneously trading, and there's arbitrage that happens every single trading session between the two markets.
So will that see a shift from the Arabica futures market swing towards the Robusta exchange? They're separate exchanges, right?
Well, no, it's the same exchange, different
Different
contracts.
contracts.
So
Okay.
it's called ICE USA under one regulatory body, and then ICE Europe.
Right.
But I mean, it's the same exchange. So if you go onto their website, you could see the certified stocks and the open interest and the same information for both.
So for all intents and purposes, nothing really changes.
No. So what happens though is that the New York market sort of dominates because world production of Arabica coffee is greater than
Then
Robusta.
Robusta.
But many people trade the Robusta market.
As speculators or as
Both.
Okay.
Because you need the liquidity. So remember,
Okay.
when you have a futures contract, you have the commercial players, and the speculators usually take the opposite side. And that's where you have the transfer of risk from the commercial hedgers to the speculators.
Okay. Okay.
And so,
go on.
okay, so what happens is typically, over the past several decades, the Arabica price tends to shoot up because there's a production problem in Brazil about once a decade. And then you have the Robusta price will follow it higher because suddenly there's that shift in demand. It's been rare where there's been a rally in Robusta prices that then helped to accelerate the Arabica market. I mean, there's a couple of times where Vietnam had an issue. The question now is when you look at Brazilian production, and clearly Robusta is growing at a faster rate, that Brazil at some point can overtake Vietnam as a larger supplier of Robusta coffee. But here's the catch on that. That coffee isn't necessarily going to be dumped into the marketplace and create a burdensome situation, because a large part of Brazilian domestic use has shifted to more Robusta coffee, which has allowed Brazil to export more Arabica.
The logistics is going to be very interesting. Tracking it over the next couple of years to see where it's all going to land. Edgar Bressani was on the podcast recently, and he's Brazilian coffee exporter, and he was talking about how the dynamic is going to shift quite significantly about who's the most dominant producer in the year over the next decade, and China's going to start to enter that whole hierarchy. But the really interesting part about it was that there is a concerted effort from a number of producing countries around the world, top producing countries, to shift in exactly what you were talking about, domestic consumption. Because from an economic perspective, it just makes more sense to be able to sell coffee locally and increase the consumer demand locally, because it just makes the logistical chain easier for everybody involved.
Well, it depends on the country. Yeah. So if you're in East Africa, a lot of the consumption is instant coffee, which traditionally has been Robusta. And so when you think in terms of the high percentage of coffee that is still consumed in the world that is instant coffee, it's always been Robusta.
Yeah. And people don't realize that. People don't realize that the majority of the coffee that's in instant is Robusta.
Right. And then also in a lot of the 3-in-1s, there's a lot of the liquid extracts. A lot of, it's all Robusta. I mean, it definitely serves its place. Where there's sort of been this, the contention in the industry, and where some of the problems have always been, was that people kind of look down on Robusta as sort of like the like
the inadequate little brother.
Right. Okay. And there was some no names mentioned at, like the SCA a while back. That was like, well, I've never let Robusta cross my lips. And there was someone, a Frenchman who was great, and he used to have sometimes a booth at the SCA, and he was always pushing on gourmet Robusta and specialty Robusta. And people just were like, what are you doing here? So then he started bringing chocolate to attract people to his booth because he was the guy giving out all the chocolate. And,
wow.
Some of the tactics that resort to, but, things have come around now.
Robusta's tasting good.
And so there's a difference in the acceptance, and there's, taste of harvest, and the acknowledgement that things have certainly improved. I mean, I remember a time with Vietnam, and, I have to understand it was a learning curve. So, and there was this sort of mindset in the Vietnamese producer that the more fertilizer we dump onto the trees, the better yields would be and the better the coffee. But they weren't understanding that too much fertilizer isn't good either. And they were damaging their trees and hurting their yields. And then they didn't have the money to invest in the highest quality fertilizer. And that's all changed now.
Oh, yeah. I have been drinking some Robustas since I have come back from World of Coffee. I got given a lot of Robustas. I am really surprised at the quality. The cup quality is amazing. And folks, if you're listening and you are a Robusta snob and you don't want to venture into this side of things, please give it a go. It's nothing like what it used to be. It's super drinkable. The caffeine wasn't as wild as I expected it to be. So it's definitely something to start thinking about. I really appreciate the tenderness that you brought to the discussion about Robusta, Judy.
Yeah, well, let's have some chocolate. I mean, it got me the booth because I'm such a chocoholic,
I'm not averse to that behavior.
So, but it was great. But, I mean, it was all a learning curve. And you think in terms of, equality in markets, and you talk about gender equality, and you talk about racial equality. Well, here we're talking about type equality, and that there is, a lot of
don't discriminate between the plants, folks.
Right, and this learning curve, and next gen on that, and
let's do it,
and a raised awareness. It's had its moment.
And Robusta is back. We're just here to say Robusta is back. Now, in our final episode, I don't know
about back, but it's had its comeuppance. It was always there in the background.
But it's I think it's here. I think that the industry is going to have to lean into it, and specialty Robusta. That's the exciting part. Now, in the next episode is going to be our last episode for the series. We're going to talk about the storms that are coming.
Okay.
I'm already mourning the fact that the series is ending. Anyway, so let's go have a conversation about the storms that are coming for coffee. Okay. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in, friends. There are 2 ways you can support this podcast. Firstly, become a paid member of our YouTube channel. Secondly, you can join our Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video before you leave, and check the show notes for more information. Now, this is what you should check out next.